Oh, 1 Kings chapter 8. We left off last week. The temple construction is finished. The palace of Solomon is finished. The ark of the Lord is safely resting within the oracle, that is to say the Holy of Holies, the 30 by 30 by 30 cubed room that's housed within the temple, with the same place that houses the two 15-foot cherubim statues. And as the priests played their instruments and sang their songs, the glory of the Lord descended in a cloud, and the Shekinah cloud upon them in the room. It filled the room such to the point that the priests could not stand while they were worshiped. They were forced to the ground. And Solomon goes from there outside to the courtyard, a big brass platform that they have built, and a 7-foot platform that they've built specifically for this. And he begins to address the people and remind them of all that God has done for them, to bring them to this place, to bless them with his presence, to bless them, to dwell among them in the ark, in the mercy seat, and in the temple now. And Solomon prays in thanksgiving to God. He says, and he gives a whole list. He says, thank you, God, that when we are in battle, you see us. When we come to you in contrition, you see us. If we ever find ourselves at odds with you, God, if we've ever strayed from the law and we completely repent of our sins, God, you're faithful and just to forgive us. And he goes through this whole list there. And we pick up now at the end of his prayer as Solomon stands before the sacrificial altar, and he turns to offer a kind of benediction to his people before he ultimately says, all right, you guys are all dismissed. So 1 Kings chapter 8, reading verses 54 through 61. And it was so that when Solomon had made an end of praying all this prayer and supplication unto the Lord, he arose from before the altar of the Lord, from kneeling on his knees with his hands spread up to heaven, and he stood and blessed all the congregation of Israel with a loud voice, saying, Blessed be the Lord that hath given rest unto his people Israel, according to all that he promised. There hath not failed one word of all his good promise, which he promised by the hand of Moses his servant. The Lord our God be with us, as he was with our fathers. Let him not leave us nor forsake us, that he may incline our hearts unto him, to walk in all his ways and to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments, which he commanded our fathers. And let these my words, wherewith I have made supplication before the Lord, be nigh unto the Lord our God day and night, that he maintain the cause of his servant and the cause of his people Israel at all times, as the matter shall require. That all the people of the earth may know that the Lord is God, and that there is none else. Let your heart therefore be perfect with the Lord our God, to walk in his statutes and to keep his commandments, as at this day. So as I said, Solomon finishes his prayer to the Lord, and he stands from kneeling before the sacrificial altar with his hands in the air, and he turns to address the gathered crowd from this great, you see the molten sea there, the great brass sea, and the 12 oxen, and he's still got his hands in the air. Solomon says, Blessed be the Lord for our peace and rest and his faithfulness, and he has never let us down. He has never broken a promise. May God ever be with us as he's been with our fathers. Let him not leave us nor forsake us. May he make us better than who we are, and incline our hearts toward him, to walk in his ways and to keep his commandments. And may God always remember that we have asked these things of him this day, that we have been humble enough and contrite enough that we are genuinely seeking him, at least at this moment, and that all the people of earth know that Jehovah is God and there is no other God at all. Verses 62 through 64. And the king and all Israel with him offered sacrifice before the Lord. And Solomon offered a sacrifice of peace offerings, which he offered unto the Lord, 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. So the king and all the children of Israel dedicated the house of the Lord. The same day did the king hallow the middle of the court that was before the house of the Lord, for there he offered burnt offerings and meat offerings and the fat of the peace offerings, because the brazen altar that was before the Lord was too little to receive the burnt offerings and meat offerings and the fat of the peace offerings. So following the prayer of thanks, King Solomon and his priests offered an immense sacrifice before the Lord. And when I say immense, I mean immense, 22,000 oxen and 120,000 sheep. And look at that. Because when you think of the logistics of something like this, look right there. That's 142,000 total animals. Those aren't going to all fit in the courtyard. There's no way. The courtyard was made for people meandering about, for receiving royal dignitaries. We're talking 142,000 animals that eat and poop and fight and are obstinate and don't always wear you and will kick you every now and then, and I can show you evidence of that one. All right? Animals are difficult. These people would have had to have all of these animals outside, trailing them into the temple in some manner of orderly fashion. I would use the word orderly somewhat loosely here. I don't know how exactly they were doing it, but the hillsides would have been covered in animals. And not just animals that Solomon owned, but animals that people are bringing to be offered. You know, they know what they're coming here to do. They know that they're coming to see the procession of the ark, the presence of God coming into the temple. We're going to consecrate the temple. How much I would love to offer one of my own oxen, one of my own sheep to consecrate the temple, be able to tell my children, my grandchildren, that yes, we contributed to the consecration of the temple here. But 142,000 animals were led through there through some kind of a system, killed, bled out, ritualistically separated, quartered, and then burnt. And that's not the kind of thing that can just casually be done. You can't just decide to do that one day. Solomon didn't decide at the last minute to offer a bunch of animal sacrifices. He would have had to know this well in advance. He would have needed to reach out to a bunch of shepherds, a bunch of herdsmen, either buy or confiscate or put out the notice and say, hey, bring your animals, we're going to consecrate the temple. Given the amount of people that would have been attending, and a lot of them would have brought their own oxen and sheep and everything to add to the offering, he probably wouldn't have had a huge time, a lot of trouble trying to get to 142,000, given how rich he was. But it's a lot of animals, and those animals would have been gathered outside the temple while the people were gathering, and the ark is proceeding through the street, so even still not quite up on the temple, because the ark commands an amount of respect where you keep your distance. And it says on the little infographic here that, let's see if I can find it. That didn't quite blow up to what I was wanting. There we go. Equivalent to 34 to 46 football fields, 41 to 61 acres in total, would be about 142,000 animals. 142,000, that's more animals than the population of Sherman. 142,000 animals. So, yes?
So just out of curiosity, I looked up, I don't know how many have been past a big processing plant where they're processing beef, just to see how many they do in a day. The most efficient can do up to 7,000. 7,000.
And that's automated.
That's automated, yeah.
Well, it was...
And I'm just sitting there.
So the magnitude of the animals is such that they had to consecrate the middle of the courtyard, which, that's, I won't say extreme, but that's a big measure to take, to say, hey, we can't run these through. That's equivalent to saying that the butcher floor is not big enough for all the animals that we got coming in. We need to build another warehouse or something. So they needed more space to offer up the burnt offerings. So they consecrated the middle of the courtyard, which again, I won't say it is outside of God's will or their ability to do, but it's a big step. And who's doing all of this? Just like you're talking, it's 120 priests is the biggest number that we've been quoted. That was in the previous, that was in chapter 8. It was in one of the previous verses here. It describes the number of priests that were playing instruments and singing songs before the glory of God descended. That was 120 priests there. So that's a firm number. Is that all of them? I don't know, but that's the biggest number that we've been quoted. And it's not like deputizing a bunch of people when there's a gang of outlaws in town. Priests have specific laws about their lineage and who can be priests. So these 120 priests, if that's as many as there were, they're saddled with the entirety of the sacrifice. And if we're being generous here, and we say that all the priests, are of equal ability and equal standing, because not a lot of them are, if they are all equal and they're switching out tasks whenever they get tired and they're working in general shift, 120 priests for 142,000 animals is still 1,183 animals, 0.3333, per priest. 1,100 animals per priest, and we know that wasn't exactly the case. So however they divided the labor, 142,000 animals, oxen and sheep, would be anywhere between 345,000 to 490,000 gallons of blood to be drained and disposed of. You see that? Look at that. That is, an Olympic swimming pool is 660,000 gallons. A football field a foot deep is 160,000 gallons, so still not quite there. Backyard swimming pool is only 20,000 gallons. We go to a tanker truck, you're talking 10,000 gallons. We're talking nearly, let's safely say right in the middle, 400,000 gallons of blood to be drained and disposed of. 8,000 barrels of wine. 34 large propane trucks, more than 2 Olympic-sized swimming pools, and a volume that at a steady stream of a gallon per second would take more than 5 days to drain out. And that's just the blood. We have hide. We have flesh. The hides of 142,000 animals would have been about 1,400 tons to be carried outside the city and eventually burned, because while the meat of the animal was used, and the fat of the colon, the fat above the liver, and everything was, and there were specific pieces that were to actually, because you're not burning the whole animal exactly, you're burning specific pieces of the inward parts of it. Then they would discard outside the city the hides and burn all of those. You're talking 1,400 tons of hide. So the flesh is used by the priestly class. And they're all gathered there for the consecration of the temple, and that's what's described in the next 2 verses. Verses 65 and 66. And at that time, Solomon held a feast, and all Israel with him, a great congregation from the entering in of Hamath unto the river of Egypt, before the Lord our God, 7 days and 7 days, even 14 days. On the 8th day he sent the people away, and they blessed the king and went unto their tents, joyful and glad of heart for all the goodness that the Lord had done for David his servant and for Israel his people. So there was a great, just tremendous, magnificent feast, the likes of which the world had never seen when this was going on. The temple was built, the palace was built, God was dwelling among his people, no longer in tabernacles, as though he might leave at some point, but in a formal house, in a dwelling covered in gold, and they had plenty of animal sacrifices to God. So there's this dearth of sanctified flesh for not only the priest, but for God's people to eat. And what's described here is, it's a little misleading, it's a little odd. It says there was a feast for 7 days, and 7 days, even 14 days. But then in verse 66, it says that Solomon sent the people away on the 8th day. And the reason it might mislead the average reader is it's not explicitly saying this, but this occasion was intentionally scheduled to butt up against and effectively overlap the Feast of Tabernacles. All right, because we remember there are three huge feasts that the Hebrews would celebrate. There was Pentecost, Passover, and the Feast of Tabernacles that commemorated the time of the Israelites in exile in the wilderness, and so all the people would build it like tent structures, little tarps stretched over poles, and they would live and eat and sleep outside for a little bit, commemorating the time that their ancestors were actually in exile. Solomon scheduled this to overlap that. So the temple had 7 days of sacrifice and feasting, and then the 8th day was a solemn assembly for the people, which is the normal beginning of the Feast of Tabernacles, and then 6 more days of feasting. So he turned them loose in verse 66 to go to their tents, their tabernacles. That's what he's saying. He's saying, you guys, I know y'all have things to do. Take some meat, take it to go plate. I'll get you little styrofoam containers. You grab one of those, you take it with you to the tabernacle out there because you're going to be eating outside for the next few days. I know how it goes, but y'all enjoy it. This meal is on me, and that's what all the people did. So they all go to their tent, and in verse 66, that's what it says, and went unto their tents joyful and glad of heart. Well, tents is synonymous with tabernacles. So this is the feast where everybody builds themselves a tabernacle, and they feast and sleep outside. So he turns all of them loose to go out, and this is kind of what it would have looked like. It would have been tabernacle by tabernacle by tabernacle by tabernacle. But all of it was intentional. He held off and began the consecration of the temple to coincide with the Feast of Tabernacles. So it was a great, tremendous time of feasting and of happiness and of joy for the children of Israel.
So all the animals are already slaughtered.
Yeah.
They're already
They're already sacrificed.
So,
I don't know. Some of them may have been mostly dead. Yeah, no, they're all right.
Just the stench
Would have been wonderful.
would have been that, and now we're having a huge feast at the same time.
Yeah. Bath and Body Works wasn't established till A.D.
It just seems like there should have been a separation somewhere.
There may have been. Maybe on the north side and south side. I don't have any idea.
We abolished that. Yeah, just the cleanliness and everything of it too, just my whole body.
I doubt they were barbecuing next to an open pit of burning hide, but yeah, somewhere there. Given the magnitude of it, the size, yeah, there would have been some logistics to overcome, something like that.
And
It's-
there's
it's-
a smell to burning hide.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
There,
You know my childhood. Burning hide.
We had so many burning
I'll
hot.
say, what was that? And there's like a mark here with a curling iron.
Okay, well, that is true. I'll give you that.
Oh, Mother's Day is over. 1 Kings chapter 9. So, moving on, looking at the first 5 verses of this one. And it came to pass, when Solomon had finished building of the house of the Lord and the king's house and all Solomon's desire which he was pleased to do, that the Lord appeared to Solomon the second time as he had appeared unto him at Gibeon. And the Lord said unto him, I have heard thy prayer and thy supplication that thou hast made before me. I have hallowed this house which thou hast built, to put my name there forever. And mine eyes and my heart shall be there perpetually. And if thou wilt walk before me as David thy father walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded thee, and will keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of thy kingdom upon Israel forever, as I promised to David thy father, saying, There shall not fail thee a man upon the throne of Israel. So Solomon, after building the temple for 7 years and then building his own house for 13 years, is again graced by the presence of God. And in 2 Chronicles, we get the clarification that this appearance was at night. It specifically says at night. So it's probably in a dream, in a nighttime vision. God tells King Solomon he's heard all of his prayers, and he has indeed hallowed the temple, and God will indeed dwell there and watch over it. And God reiterates the deal, Solomon, if you walk uprightly as your father David walked uprightly, if you keep my commandments, your line will continue. The throne of thy kingdom will last upon Israel forever. And that's not some promise of immortality. It's a promise of heritage. It's saying that the line of David will endure as long as they stay within the will of God and seek his face. And it's the same thought that I get anytime I read something like this. In verse 4, if thou wilt walk before me as David thy father walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded thee. How do I say this? It's a message of grace, a message of hope to read something like that, to know that David, though he had some massive errors. I don't know, what's a polite way to say he murdered a guy because he lusted after someone. Though he had a massive error in his life that doomed his line, that said, that God looked at it and said that the sword will never depart from your line. Even still, in God's grace, he looks at the inclination of your heart and not your weakest point, but your I'm not saying that he averages your life together into some kind of a summation there, but I think even when David was in the throes of lust and had fallen to something like this, even still at his core, there was a godly man who at the time had just fallen into sin. And when it was over and he repented of it and he recuperated himself, God was still willing to look at him as a godly man, and just as it says in the New Testament, is faithful and just to forgive us our sin, to cast it as far as the east is from the west, and to not hold that kind of thing against us. Great an error, though it may be, even still the sum of his life was godliness, and David was a man after God's own heart and went on to write so many psalms and so many things that were true reflections of his heart, and that he wasn't judged ultimately by his weakest point. Because you read that's not the only time that you see something like that when it refers to David, as a man of faith, as a wonderful man. And when we talk about David in Sunday school, we've got like two stories. We've got David and Goliath, we've got David and Bathsheba, and that's just about all that we read about David. And it looks like, well, this man was just as evil as he was good. Well, that's not really true. He was a man who was after God's heart, but he did slip and fall at one point. But as he repented, God did not hold that against him and was able to see the true nature of his heart. So again, something uplifting to take from this, even though it's, I won't say casually said in here, but it's not really the crux of the passage. Verses 6 through 9. But if ye shall at all turn from following me, ye or your children, and will not keep my commandments and my statutes, which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then will I cut off Israel out of the land which I have given them, and this house which I have hallowed for my name will I cast out of my sight, and Israel shall be a proverb and a byword among all people. And at this house which is high, everyone that passeth by it shall be astonished, and shall hiss. And they shall say, Why hath the Lord done thus unto this land and to this house? And they shall answer, Because they forsook the Lord their God, who brought forth their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and have taken hold upon other gods, and have worshipped them, and served them. Therefore hath the Lord brought upon them all this evil. The verse that comes to my mind when I read this is, Do not be deceived. God will not be mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, so shall he reap. God will not dwell in a house of idolatry. So he tells Solomon very plainly, if you go out and you serve other gods, I will cast your people out of the land, and this great wonderful house that you have built with the materials that I have made and that you have covered in gold, that is such a wonderful sight for everybody, I will pour out judgment so harsh on this house that the very sight of it will be a proverb among your people. It will be a cautionary tale among the people who see it. People will pass by its ruin and they will hiss at it like a snake. And that's some pretty harsh language for ancient Israel. That's pretty bad. People are going to look at this house and hiss, and they will say, what happened there? And you'll be able to tell them, oh, that's the people that turned from the one true God to idolatry. And when I was preparing this, you know what I thought about? It's the house in Luella, the mansion in Luella. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? If you go through Luella, Luella is one road. There's one mansion up there on 44 acres. It's 13,612 square foot mansion, 4 bedrooms, 5.5 baths on a 44-acre estate with a tennis court, a detached guest house, a saltwater pool, a vineyard. Gorgeous, right? Look at that. Man, that's on the main drag in Luella right now. Vineyard. Look at that. That's the backyard. The pool and the columns. Look at that. Look, the jets come in from the side. Oh my gosh, that's a sauna. That's a sauna. Those are massage chairs. And then a hot tub. Oh, I can't quite vouch for the upholstery, but there's a bunch of guitars on the wall. A billiard room. I would love a billiard room. Like right over there, if we ever want to build one. Home theater. People, that's popcorn buckets in a home theater. Look at all that. That's beautiful. Anybody know the rumors about this place? I mean, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, if somebody here actually knows. The rumor I hear is that the owners committed a little Medicare fraud. A little bit of an idol to the side, trying to take advantage of the government here. Ran into some trouble with the law, and now this great mansion on a hilltop is abandoned and scheduled to go up for auction, and the years have not been kind. We've got little shutters hanging off. We're overgrown. Sidewalks starting to crack. This used to be a vineyard. That's overgrown. Yeah, no, the pictures are kind. They really are. The pictures are a little aged, but I didn't take the time to drive out to Luella. A little outdoor algae growing that they're doing. That's got to be intentional, right? That used to be an office that was dark red with a bunch of really nice furniture in it. Oh, nope, too far. No, that was not in the house. That was hidden in a Swiss account somewhere. They were hoping we'd never find it. So now everyone that drives by that house, they see the gate, they see the cracked sidewalk, they see the overgrown vineyard that you can barely even tell was a vineyard, the broken windows and the hanging off shutters, and you can't do anything. I don't hiss. I don't think I've ever hissed in my life, but you look at it and you go, oh, what happened there? And everybody that's in the know says, oh yeah, those are the people that tried to build the government, however much they tried to build, to Medicare, and then got raided by the FBI, and now they're serving time somewhere in this 44-acre mansion estate on a hilltop, I mean on a hilltop. It has an amazing view. They're gone, and this place is just breaking down. And God says if that should ever befall the temple, people won't even have to guess. They won't have to rely on rumors. People will say, why did the Lord do this to this house and this people? And everyone's going to know the answer because they forsook God and they chased after idols. So, I think that's probably the best one. And even still, I don't know what it looks like now. There may not even be any water in it. It may just be algae. It may just be a bunch of plants right now. This is Luella. So if you ever, you know where you pass by Buc-ee's on 75 going south out of Sherman? The highway that goes across there to Buc-ee's, that'll take you past the new addition, past the waste treatment facility built, where the new addition was built. That's a whole other...
Okay, I hear about the waste treatment. You said Buc-ee's.
Buc-ee's, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Schulman's. Schulman's, not Buc-ee's. Schulman's.
And then the waste treatment, and then y'all turn left to come to church. If you turn right, it's about
A mile, 2.
3 or 4 miles.
Yeah, it's like 3 or 4.
It's after the well.
It's on that road, and it's an eyesore. You can't miss it. You just have to be driving that way. And there's a little sign now that says, to be auctioned on the state government, which at 44 acres of the hillside on there, it's got to be worth more for land than it is to, I bet everybody looking at it's like, is it worth bulldozing every bit of the thing? Whatever. Verses 10 through 13. And it came to pass at the end of 20 years, when Solomon had built the 2 houses, the house of the Lord and the king's house. Now Hiram, the king of Tyre, had furnished Solomon with cedar trees and fir trees and with gold according to all his desire, that then King Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. And Hiram came out from Tyre to see the cities which Solomon had given him, and they pleased him not. And he said, What cities are these which thou hast given me, my brother? And he called them the land of Kabul unto this day. So at the end of all the construction, Solomon felt he should compensate Hiram, the king of Tyre, in some way more than he's been providing food this whole time. He's been providing grain because Tyre is a coastal city. They're great merchants. They have a whole bunch of trade. They're not huge at cultivating. So a lot of what he was doing, and it says this when we talked about it, a lot of what he was doing was saying, hey, I'm going to give your people, I'm going to feed the servants that you have working on the temple, and I'm going to trade you grain for what we're doing. But he wanted to go a little over the top with that. Maybe he felt he was owed a little bit more because there was some gold thrown in with what Hiram was giving him. Solomon gave him 20 cities in the land of Galilee, and we all know Galilee. We're all familiar with that. Now, we don't know the names of the cities. All we really know is that the land of Galilee, where they are situated, is hill-covered and mountainous in some places, and the soil, though it is very fertile, is thick, and it's clay-like, and it is relatively difficult to cultivate. So Hiram came down from Tyre to see the cities that Solomon had given him, and we're not told exactly why, but Hiram did not like the cities that he had been gifted. And scholars have speculated at this, but like I said, it's all speculation. Some of them think that Hiram had his eye on specific cities, and he was sad that he got these 20 cities instead of these cities that he was actually wanting. Some of them are saying, hey, Hiram was a seafaring king of Tyre and a bunch of coastal cities there, and they wanted more coastal cities to be able to grow his empire along the coast. Some of them had said, hey, he's got plenty of coastal cities. What he really wanted was some places where they could grow their own grain, some really nice, easily cultivated cities, but they didn't like being handed cities that were not particularly disposed toward that purpose, but we don't have any idea. King Hiram comes down in verse 13. He tells Solomon, he says, come on, brother, what are you giving me here? Which, between two kings, they could talk like that. That's somewhat familiar. That's like Trump meeting Xi Jinping or something like that. That's the way they talk to each other is a little different than you or I would talk to either one of those people here. But he says, come on, brother, what are you giving me here? What are these cities? And Hiram termed the cities the land of Kabul. And we have no idea what that means. We can't tie it to any specific language, to any specific word at that time. By the context, it's not a good name. It's not anything nice. The best guesses are it means land of dirt, but again, even that is a guess and not the kind of educated speculation that we have over even why he didn't like the cities. It's just Kabul is this weird word thrown out there that we don't see anywhere else, so we have no other choice but to guess at its meaning. Verses 14 through 19. And Hiram sent to the king 60 talents of gold. And this is the reason of the levy which King Solomon raised for to build the house of the Lord and his own house and Millo and the wall of Jerusalem and Hazor and Megiddo and Gezer. For Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and taken Gezer and burnt it with fire and slain the Canaanites that dwelt in the city and given it for a present unto his daughter Solomon's wife. And Solomon built Gezer and Beth-horon the nether and Baalath and Tadmor in the wilderness in the land, and all the cities of store that Solomon had, and cities for his chariots, and cities for his horsemen, and that which Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem and in Lebanon and in all the land of his dominion. So verse 14, and we can't say for sure, it may tie to the previous chunk, because verses in general, chaptering and headings in general, they're not arbitrary, but they were added after the fact of the text here. So when it says that Hiram sent him 60 talents of gold, that may have been in exchange for the cities. It may have been part of the tax that is talked about, the levy that follows it here. We can't really say which one to attribute. It's 120 talents. It's about 9,000 pounds of gold. So it's a lot of gold. It's a whole bunch of gold. But do we know if that was in exchange for cities as part of their commerce, between the temple and the construction of the palace and everything like that, and they're just wrapping up that deal? Or is it something that Solomon, after the fact, said, hey, I'm levying a tax. I'm requiring a tribute from a whole bunch of people. Hiram, you're among those, and I want you to add to this. I would tend towards this being part of a tax, because 120 talents of gold is about a fifth. 1 Kings chapter 10 says what Solomon would take in a year, and 120 talents of gold is about a fifth of what he would actually take in a year. And a fifth of annual revenue doesn't seem a whole lot in exchange for 20 cities. It seems much more commensurate to being a taxed amount. We don't really. Some even say it was a loan to Solomon, but I don't think Solomon was any real shortage of money and had no need of a loan. So it seems most probable to me that this was a tax. It was the levy that's described in verse 15, extracted funds which Solomon took from the Israelites and from Canaanite subjects. And we don't get a real window into to the politics of the situation. It seems that Hiram paid into the tax with everything else that was levied. He was able to build up, not only using that money, Solomon could build up the house of God. He built up the palace, his own palace, but also it says the Millo. It'll just say Millo in your Bible more than likely, but if you ever look at it in the Hebrew, it always has the article. It's the Millo. The Millo is understood to be the fortified part of Jerusalem, the gates, the walls. It's almost like a collective term, not really a location, but the defenses, as they say. So it's kind of the walls around, not the walls around Jerusalem are listed separate, the walls around specific parts of the city, because there is, within Jerusalem, there are different parts. There's the city of David, there's Mount Zion, the fortress that they have within Israel. So you have to think of Jerusalem not as one uniform city, but almost as like a city with neighborhoods or boroughs or something like that. He built up Hazor, a city that had been taken and burnt by Joshua a long, long time ago. He built up the city of Megiddo. He built up the city of Gezer, which Solomon's father-in-law, the Pharaoh, had formerly plundered and burnt as a gift to his daughter before she was ever married to Solomon. So that's a fun conversation. We're going to take some of this gold, and I'm going to build up this city that your father, because he loved you so much, decided to burn and plunder, but it's in my land, so now that we're married, I'm going to take some gold, I'm going to build that back up. He built up Beth-horon the Nether, and when it says Beth-horon the Nether, it's a name that distinguishes it from Beth-horon the Upper. So there's two Beth-horons there. There's Upper Beth-horon and Beth-horon the Nether. It built up Baalath, which was a city on the border of the Philistine lands, and Tadmor in the wilderness. So those were the major projects of note that Solomon set out to build up. But then verse 19 gives this kind of catch-all that really any city that Solomon desired, he would build up. The cities for storing goods, like grain, oil, wine. He built up his store cities. He built up cities for his chariots. We later find out he had 1,400 of those, so there were cities that were just essentially like a garage, like Jay Leno building a whole other city over here to house his car collection or something. He had a city for his horsemen because he had 12,000 horsemen. That is enough to need their own city. Whatever he liked, he had it built. He had enough workers and he had enough gold to do it. Verses 20 through 23. And all the people that were left of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, which were not of the children of Israel, their children that were left after them in the land, whom the children of Israel also were not able to utterly destroy, upon those did Solomon levy a tribute of bondservice unto this day. But of the children of Israel did Solomon make no bondmen, but they were men of war, and his servants, and his princes, and his captains, and rulers of his chariots, and his horsemen. These were the chief of the officers that were over Solomon's work, 550, which bear rule over the people that wrought in the work. So at this point, there are still Canaanites living among the nation of Israel. And if you remember in Joshua, if you were here for Joshua, we hit a point in Joshua towards the end there where there is this long, depressing list of peoples and nations that God commanded the Israelites to decimate and drive out of the land, and the Israelites just flat out didn't do it. And there was a whole list of excuses to go along with it. But there is a depressing section in Joshua that says this is their list of disobedience. Instead, they decided to let them live among the Israelites. Say, live with us. We'll get tribute from them. We'll disobey God in exchange for a revenue stream. And a lot of them were employed in carrying water and chopping wood and various forms of manual labor. And what verse 21 is saying is the aliens among the Israelites were not taxed exactly as the Israelites were. They were required to render construction labor as their tribute. They were bondsmen. These were the servants. These were the laborers of the land. When the Israelites were conscripted to build the temple, you remember they worked in shifts back and forth. They'd be in Lebanon for a month. They'd be back home for 2 months. They're working in both places, but they're not doing the hard work. Even that was for the aliens among them. So now that construction is finished, the labor force is alien, and the Israelites have graduated on to this more dignified service to the crown, but still service. But now they're captains, they're princes, they are rulers of chariots, they're horsemen. They've graduated up from the hard manual labor that they had been doing. And at the very top of the hierarchy here, it says Solomon had 550 chief officers. And in 1 Kings 5, we get the number 3,300 quoted as the number of officers over the temple builders. So just a few chapters ago, we were talking about 3,300 work foremen. So now we're down to roughly a sixth of that. These are the elite, the ones that have proven themselves. These are the real ones that are likely to get things done, the good officers in charge, the big CEOs and executives, the C-suite. Verses 24 through 28. Yeah, and that's the whole chapter, isn't it? But Pharaoh's daughter came up out of the city of David under a house which Solomon had built for her. Then did he build Millo. And 3 times in a year did Solomon offer burnt offerings and peace offerings upon the altar which he built unto the Lord. And he burned incense upon the altar that was before the Lord, so he finished the house. And King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion-Geber, which is beside Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. And Hiram sent in the navy his servants, shipmen that had knowledge of the sea, with the servants of Solomon, and they came to Ophir and fetched from thence gold 420 talents and brought it to King Solomon. So the author points out here that Pharaoh's daughter came up out of Solomon's old dwelling in the city of David, which again is a separate borough of Jerusalem, Mount Zion. And then she began to live in the separate house that Solomon built for her. And she had a house separate from Solomon's and formerly separate from the temple structure and the courtyard and everything because, and we don't see it now, but in 2 Chronicles chapter 8 verse 11, it says, And Solomon brought up the daughter of Pharaoh out of the city of David unto the house that he had built for her, for he said, My wife shall not dwell in the house of David, king of Israel, because the places are holy, whereunto the ark of the Lord hath come. So she was Egyptian. She was not of the holy people. Now she would have been in the process, at least, of adopting their customs, following their laws, becoming one of the adoptive aliens that they would take in, that they mention all through the Old Testament in Leviticus. But the ark is a different thing completely. Out of reverence to the ark, to the presence of God, she was kept separate in her own house. And then it says in verse 24, Then did he build Millo, the fortifications around her house and around that part of the palace. So it's saying that she was kept separate because the ark, even with Israelites, Uzzah dared to step out and touch the ark, just to stabilize it at one point, and he was struck dead. There is a kind of reverence that comes with the ark that you would not want to test through the presence of foreign peoples, that not God's chosen people here. So they kept her completely separate. And 3 times a year, Solomon would burn incense on the altar to God. And most likely this is the 3 great feasts, because again, we have Passover, Pentecost, and then we have the Feast of Tabernacles. And this information is offered as kind of a side note. We've seen it before, and it's the same here. The authors feel the need to start tying things up when they finish a big piece of narration, when all the construction is done, and that's going to be, one downbeat in the narration. They start throwing in other things because it's not so important to them when it all happened. They don't feel the need to lay it all quite out in a timeline. But we've talked about the construction, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened at some point in there. So you see him talking about offering incense. Not like he's doing it all at once. Right? Again, it's not chronological is what I'm trying to say. So here, which again, not to say the chapter endings are completely arbitrary, but we have made this the end of the chapter because we see that the author is starting to wrap up some of the information here. We see information on the Egyptian wife and the observance of the peace. And then lastly, Solomon's navy. The last little bit that they want to throw in before the downbeat of the narrative. And it's included here, but the navy was actually organized at the beginning of Solomon's reign. Notice the word that's used there in the King James. It says in King Solomon, in verse 26, and King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion-Geber. Made a navy. It's not saying he built ships. It's not saying he was involved in construction of ships. And there's a picture of some ship. He formed a navy with the ships that had been given him by King Hiram, ships that carried servants and sailors from King Hiram to Solomon. So one of the things that King Hiram of Tyre gave him was a navy of ships stocked with sailors, people that knew how to operate these ships and work these ships. So yes, Solomon made a navy, but really that's saying, hey, these 20, 30, we never know how many ships here, but he's saying this amount of ships that I have, this is my navy. I declare it so. I have made a navy. Solomon was sending servants to cut wood. Hiram was sending sailors that knew the sea, so that there was still a lot of back and forth here. And it says that they were able to use those ships to go to Ophir and gather gold for Solomon. And again, it's another note that's kind of thrown in, not chronologically, but just that it happened. We have no idea where Ophir is. None at all. Doesn't show up on any of the maps. The most probable places are Africa, India, or somewhere in Arabia, but we can't say for sure. What we can say is that they went there with this navy of ships, a portion of the navy of ships, and they returned with a whole bunch of gold for King Solomon. And we don't even know in exchange for what, but that's what they throw in right before the chapter wraps up. Oh, and that's 8 and 9. That's not that bad. And then when we come back next week, and this is interesting too, we hear about the Queen of Sheba. Yeah, the Queen of Sheba. And y'all heard the Queen of Sheba? I'm gonna get creative with the slides. I think y'all.